In the last episode, George, a sound practitioner and guide, came to the studio to talk to us about sound meditation. He explains his journey and what brought him here today. Studies have shown that sound meditation can help to reduce stress and anxiety, which are two common causes of sleep problems. Sound meditation can also help to promote relaxation and promote a deeper sleep. We decided to bring in George to the podcast to hear his first-hand opinion as a sound practitioner about the benefits of sound. It is interesting because we are more in control than we think. Hello, and welcome to another episode of No More Distractions podcast. The gift of sound meditation all over New York City. I love his Sunday classes. They get you all grounded and ready for the week ahead. If you missed the last episode, please go back and listen because we share good introductory information about sound. In this episode, part 2 of the healing powers of sound, we dive in deeper and explore if sound can actually heal you. Let's get into our second part of our interview with George. Is that how you came up with Sound of Times?
Someone else asked me this the other day, and I cannot remember where it came from. I think it was after my first or second training with David and our other teacher, Alexandre Tanous. And I think I was on my way back on the train, and I was like, oh, God, I really should probably think about how to talk about this as a platform or as I don't want to say brand, as a way of saying it's this, but it's not just George MacPherson, because I had other things I was doing at the time. Anyway, Sound of the Times somehow came up, and interestingly, now when I look back at it, it is it for me feels like quite a useful way of conveying that sound is uniquely of the present moment as it happens time and time again. It is not the thing in the past. It can't be the thing in the future. The sound we listen to is that thing in the present moment now.
That's interesting. Because I'm trying to think you've never had a memory of a sound or a song, I guess, is recorded, right? So it's there. But I'm trying to think, because we can have a memory of a smell, right? That brings us back somewhere.
Well, we can have memories of sound, but that sound itself cannot exist anywhere else. Once the sound has happened, the sound has happened.
It's there, yeah.
And that's the beauty of non-recorded sound, in a way. Even if I wanted to, in the sound meditation, I'd never really be able to repeat the same sound that someone, I really want to go back to George's sound meditation because I love that one tiny moment of that very specific sound. Yeah. It might happen, but I'm also not strictly a musician, so to get that one thing again would be, I can't work out ratios, or percentages. It'd be very unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that the same way that people get affected from each other when they come to group meditation, the same way it affects you, right? And you set your space with everybody else and you express it a certain way. And that's why every time it's different, right? You get inspired, I'm assuming, from the energy from the room.
Yeah.
Or do you usually have a specific intention and say, I want to guide them a specific way? Like,
when I
because a yoga class is like, some teachers might go in there and say, okay, I'm going to lead up to that asana, right? Or I'm going to wait, fill out the room, and see what they need.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you, like, what is your approach?
So I'm definitely a studious sound practitioner, and will sometimes find myself listening to a podcast or reading a book, any of these, and then in the beginning when I was practicing first for groups, I felt the need to always have something to like tether it to, like here's the thing I've read this week, guys, and let's talk through this. And then all of a sudden I stopped doing that. I stopped over intellectualizing like the need for it to somehow be there's always a talk at the beginning, and oftentimes that's about how to listen to sound, and maybe I'll weave some things that I've read, but rather than it being this sound meditation prescriptively is going to be about this, it is this interesting combination of what's been flowing around in my week, not necessarily the book that I've been reading from, but the experience that I've had that has led me to this point where I'm like, oh, this thing is out there as energy. Let's use that as a lens through which to explain sound or talk about how to be able to sit with ourselves and experience the present moment. And there is that other element of really picking up the energy in the room critically whilst that talk is happening. And because sometimes people are like, oh, do we have to listen to this thing all over again? I've done this before. I'm like, listen, I know how to do a sound meditation. And yet there is always that part of wanting to bring to the room the level of appreciation for the practice, which is a lineage, is what I've been taught and has been passed through, many teachers before it arrived at me. Almost treating each experience as if it's always going to have that person who's never been before, who needs to have the benefit of being invited into sound meditation on the most fundamental, basic level. And so whilst talking this through and picking up whether or not there's no eye contact, or someone's looking at their phone, or someone's darting around because there's some nervous energy going on there and not quite sure if they want to be there or not. Somehow my body, because I definitely think this is beyond like the intellectualizing, and I can't really work it out in terms of, okay, well, X% has been here before and so. I'm absorbing something from the room that allows me to somehow interpret what level of sound and connection is necessary. And that feels like a beautiful thing to do with flow more than anything else. Like, it's when I kind of separate from this like studious George MacPherson, the sound practitioner, to just in the room creating sound, picking up what's being dropped, and that becomes a really, I don't know, it feels more, it is intuitive. It's right. I don't know, sometimes I'm surprised by it myself. And yet I know that's just about being a custodian or steward of sound. And perhaps because I really enjoy it, and I really love being a part of that practice and that world and people's immersion into sound.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking it, because it gives a lot of space. The topic of healing, where sound is related, or where sound doesn't even need to be a part of it. In the Western mindset, this fierce attachment to healing as the thing we all need, the thing that somehow, if we're not healed, there's a problem. When we wrap sound into that, and especially in this current climate, and particularly in a world here in America, for instance, that has propagated this desire to heal everything, but yet not actually ever get to the root cause. We're living in a world in which if we can say, whether it's in a news article or on a website or on a podcast or on an Instagram post, this thing will work, but yet not really offer a way of looking at it beyond healing. It's almost like we tethered a word, sound, to healing, and therefore everyone who sits in a sound experience thinks that there is a way in which this is going to be the answer. It's going to be the solution. And it also tethers us to this idea that we aren't something more than healing, or we aren't something more than victims of our trauma. That perhaps there is an opportunity to look at sound as something so much greater, and that sound being an invitation to something that takes us deeper into ourselves, that allows us to explore a deeper layer of consciousness that is not just about healing. Perhaps healing is the entry point for many people. There is a community of practitioners who genuinely believe and feel that, and I'm one of them, that sound is a beautiful opening to both spirituality, to science, to an interconnectedness, to community. And when sound gets used as a tool for healing, it just negates so much more that's possible. We live in this Western mindset that we're all traumatized. And in truth, there is some legitimacy to that. Yet, if that's all we ever think that we are, we're going to be stuck going back to that same sound healing experience time and time again until we are healed. Or that one didn't work for us, so I'll go and find another one, or I'm going to go and find another modality that also claims to heal me. And what are we looking for? We're just going to go through one layer to another layer to another layer to another layer until suddenly, perhaps, we get to a conclusion that that healing journey isn't really taking us anywhere other than spending more money on the healing modality in the first place. And I think there is legitimacy to sound as a conduit towards healing. And there can be many layers of what healing is. It can be a physical impediment. It can be trauma. But my firm belief as a sound practitioner or a sound meditation facilitator, and certainly not someone who would call themselves a sound healer, is if we always refer to it as that, as the person, the practitioner being the healer, or the sound itself being the healer, we negate this very important role of the person who is sitting and receiving sound as capable of nurturing or awakening or reconnecting to this healing quality that rests inside of themselves. The more work I've done in this field, the more reading I might have done, and the more understanding myself around the qualities of sound in this experience. So there's this part, I think, with experiencing sound in this meditative practice, that when we begin to use or come into relationship with sound and explore the healing power of vibration, like we're no longer seeing it as that person who is facilitating is the healer, or that the instruments themselves are healing instruments, like healing crystal singing bowls. I don't believe that necessarily is what we should be trying to promote. More so, how the person who is coming into the experience gets to actively see themselves as part of a relationship between all of those variables but not just part of a relationship, a central component, the most integral part. So as that person begins to feel vibration and their body begins to absorb that vibration, we don't need to have that person think, okay, I'm going to send this vibration down to that part of me that is aching. The body already knows where it's needed. So all that person really needs to do is just apply a level of awareness and focus to continuing to listen to sound, as opposed to listening to all the business of their head and all the things they have to do in a single day or what they need to do tomorrow. And just relax into the experience enough that they're no longer holding on to perhaps the pain they came in with. That pain is no longer as important as the sound that they're focused on listening to. And bringing to that a level of intention of their own.
Right.
I read this, or rather listened to this really beautiful book. It's called The Humming Effect.
Is it in here?
It's not, because I actually never bought the print copy of all the books, but I listened to it on Audible. And I have to say, because of the content, because of what it was about, it's actually really good to listen to it. It's called The Humming Effect: The Healing Power of Sound, and by this incredible author, writer, sound founding father, Jonathan Goldman. And in it, he talks a little bit about, or a lot, around trying to assess the veracity of those claims as to frequency or sound or vibration meaning healing. And they went to great lengths to try and establish this being the case. The research, though, would come back with just as many variables that didn't necessarily support the claim. However, when they went deeper into the data sets, they understood that only with intention of the recipient were they able to show that sound or vibration or frequency was of a healing medium. And so this idea that sound itself, on its own, vibration, has a degree of importance. It's powerful. I know that. If the recipient themselves isn't able to also bring to the experience something that they are willing that sound or vibration to be a part of their healing, whatever that may be, it's very unlikely that it's going to be healing. Mm-hmm. It brings to mind this other beautiful phrase by the writer Mark Nepo.
It's actually...
Do have this book, The Exquisite Risk. It's such a powerful book, and I have recommended it to almost everyone who's ever come to sit in my sound meditations, particularly because of this one quote that my teacher told to me. And for a while, I just sat with the quote, and I'd always talk about the quote. And I was like, I'm going to have to read this book at some point, because I have to understand more contextually about what he's saying. And so it's in the first few pages, he talks about the act of listening. And he says, to listen is to lean in softly with a willingness to be changed by what we hear. And this is a man who had cancer and he no longer has cancer. His own healing journey brought him to a place where he understood that healing is a radical act. Listening is a radical act. And to be able to see ourselves as a central part of the equation, as opposed to just someone who is sitting in an experience, having the experience happen around them, to reconsider our position in all we do, not just in a sound meditation, but in a conversation like you and I are having. And this is where I think the power of these community-centered experiences is so, so powerful, so potent, that we're also giving ourselves tools for how to be human beings. Not just to see ourselves as statistics, not just to see ourselves as monitoring and measuring success. Was I able to sit in a sound meditation for an hour and not think? This is not the point. It is how to be able to offer ourselves tools, and not just offer ourselves, but offer each other ways of integrating our experiences, ways of metabolizing our experiences together, to hear each other. And so going back to that point that we talked about originally around getting people to share at the end their experiences, why that's so important oftentimes is to be heard, to be listened to be able to speak without judgment, self-judgment, but also judgment from our peers, because we're all here doing the same thing. And I will often say that sharing part is really an extension of the deep listening exercise. To be able to have 35 people or however many people sitting in a room, each paying just as much judicious attention to one person after another, sharing what they have to share, and listening to it with a level of intention to be changed by what they hear. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah. There's so many things that have been coming up to my head while you're talking, and it's making it so much harder to be an active listener. And it's so interesting because this is really what we're talking about, right? Like the receiver has to come in with an open mind to really listen, right? And, you know, from what I'm gathering, and I think I really agree with, the sound and sound meditation is really your tool. It's really up to you how you're going to receive it and the benefits that you could get out of it. And I think active listening is so hard, right? A lot of us struggle with that, from the simplest conversation to technically being like devoted to a sound meditation. And a lot of us think so much what we want to say before we are about to say it. And it really like hinders our relationships with people, because I think it's so much harder to really connect with the other person if you don't actually listen to what they have to say. And I think it really has to do with your empathy like levels. Like I think people that are more empathetic can also connect with other people in different levels. So somebody might be an active listener, but they might not be listening the full spectrum of what the other person has to say, because they cannot connect in many levels. And I think that this is something you definitely have, because when you walk into a room and you're saying that I can intuitively understand the energies of the room, I think it really has to do with your empathetic levels as well towards everybody, right?
Yes. And so what I would reflect back to you on that is how deeply we're listening, because there is a potential that is empathy, just a greater spectrum of listening. If we were to consider for a second that before the words come out of our mouth, there is a thought that is generating the word or the sentiment. Before that thought is the breath we take. Before that breath we take is the beating of our heart. And maybe shifting the word from empathy to compassion, this ability to both absorb and create the meaning of the words we share starts way before that word gets made. Our body is literally vibrating at a rate at which we're able to convey a meaning that between two people who are listening deeply, a silent communication is also taking place. That in itself is also vibration. So when people talk about, oh, I really vibed with him, that is not woo-woo. We are literally in sympathetic resonance with each other. And we talk at the very foundational level of what really is going on with sound meditation and any practice with sound. It is about re-establishing a place of harmony in ourselves, a level of coherence between our mind, our body, and our heart, but critically, a level of harmony between each other. Mm-hmm. And what's the opposite of harmony is dis-ease. So, getting a little deep with you and really, you and I are really looking at each other in the eye as we're talking, because we're in harmony. And that place of being empathetic, that place of perhaps being able to intuit what is going on in the room energetically, is really about how much you're prepared to be communicating and acting from your heart as opposed to from your head. Mm. All of a sudden, all those things that you're thinking, I've got all these things to think, it's gone out the window because we're just absorbing each other's energy and vibration and exploring what comes up from that. So in other terms, we're beginning to speak from our gut, from that center of experience that holds so much truth, and guiding people to that, which we do in sound meditation. Oftentimes we may use an instrument on someone's belly or close to them in a way that I could really feel that vibration. It's a reawakening, a sense of connectiveness to what our gut is telling us, what our heart is telling us, how we feel in that moment when we are not thinking about what comes next.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think sometimes the experience is so different. Like, a conversation you could have with somebody can be so different. And it's beautiful if with sound meditation and that vibration, it can shift somebody from being super logical and always being in their head to moving this to their gut. Like, it's beautiful. And do you think that can happen with, like, a regular conversation that you can have with somebody, that you can shift their perspective?
After sound meditation, or?
I mean, yeah, I'm sure that after sound meditation, you've definitely noticed that, right?
Yeah.
But do you think even without the use of an instrument, like, do you consider a conversation to also be a way of, like, a sound interaction that could shift that?
Totally. I mean, if you think about, in some ways, going back to that question around can sound heal, what are the things we need healing from the most, if we were to just put it out there?
You said it before, traumas usually, because we think we're traumatized.
Arguments and confrontation. In the immediate term, where do we see things falling apart in this world is the ability to actually communicate, to listen, to share, to find some space between two opposing arguments. And I was reminding myself of one of my favorite books.
Bring it on.
It's called
You brought like six different books.
The Conscious Ear by Alfred Tomatis, who really did much of the groundwork around sound therapy back in like the 1940s, 50s, 60s. And this is his autobiography. And he has it. I'm probably not going to be able to find it. I hope I can. Oh,
you have to give me, by the way, all the books so I can reference them.
I'm going to.
We can share it with everybody.
Nothing illustrates better the effects of this placing resonance than the following anecdote. I did a simple but eloquent experiment with two monks. First, I gave them an identical listening pattern and suggested that they discuss together a particularly thorny theological problem. Next, with his electronic ear, which is a device he created. Next, I altered their listening curves so as to make them incompatible and to make them talk about rain and fine weather. What happened? In the first case, they fell into agreement on every point in the discussion. In the second, when he'd adjusted the auditory curve, they began to quarrel in less than a quarter of an hour. That opens a startling new perspective on the superficiality of some understandings and the shallow nature of some disagreements. Now, that might sound complicated because the book itself is complicated and it took me a long time to get through, but it does come to this place of sound is everywhere. We may have to go to a sound meditation to understand the nature of sound, but in conversation, how we find places of compassionate agreement or disagreement, as opposed to speaking with our overstimulated mind from a place of scarcity or needing to make our point heard and not actually listening to the point that's being made toward us. Creating space, creating the right environment to be able to have a conversation that genuinely nurtures each other's perspective. These are some of the most valid tools that we could and should have. And really is just a reconnection to speaking and communicated and acting from a place of heart-centeredness. Mm-hmm. It's pretty deep stuff.
It is. It's pretty deep stuff. I don't think we can unpack everything during this episode, but I think it's really important to get other people to also think about those things, right? I mean, we need to have these conversations. A lot of times we don't talk about these things, and spirituality and how important it is to practice our mind and connect it with our body in just a different way than we do during our day-to-day to-do lists, right?
Yeah.
It's so important.
I think, I'm sitting here listening to you and thinking to myself, oh my God, I didn't even talk about any of the important details of what happens in a sound meditation and why certain instruments are good for certain things. And there are so many facts that we can talk about. And I'm like, oh my God, I have to prove that I know how to do this. And yet, all of it falls apart unless we're also not holding ourselves so closely attached to the outcome, but if we're not cognizant that there is a purpose that remains for these experiences that are about how to integrate them into our daily lives, how to integrate them into our way of being, that for me is one of the biggest services of the experience. It is not just about shuttling people into a room, getting them to lie down for 90 minutes and then packing them off again, never seeing them again, but genuinely wanting it to be an opening towards community. And the spaces that I work with, Kula, where I met you, and various other places in the city that have really offered me the potential to be able to, yes, be a sound practitioner, but also just be around people, get to know people, have them come in time and time again and find something in themselves that they didn't know existed. And that's a really beautiful part of the experience for me.
Yeah, the community, I mean, it's amazing. The people I've met too throughout all this time, and I'm very excited that I got to meet you. It's beautiful how so many like-minded people can really connect to each other and find each other.
And not like-minded people.
And
because
not,
I think that's the part of it that's so crucial, is everyone should feel invited and no one should feel alienated. And that, I think, the divisiveness of our times is the thing that's going to screw us up so royally. And so how to be able to be a part of inviting people into spaces together and hear from each other and be with each other. And I come back to that thing of collective effervescence being one of the most beautiful and powerful and potent medicines within any of this work, is that people being around people, experiencing this one shared moment, is truly heart-opening. And to get back to that place of awe where we feel wonder and our body feels wonder in the same way that we may have experienced when we were kids, but as we get older, we get far more and more distant to it.
I think there's something that you're about to start doing next month that has been a secret and you haven't really shared with me. Do you want to share it? I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm really happy to be able to talk about it and share it more with your audience, but also even say it myself because I haven't been able to. As part of this sound practice that's been going on for a few years, one of the studios I work with on the Upper East Side, a relatively new location called Sage and Sound, I'm beginning to work with them on a full-time basis as their director of programming. So from next month, I'll be creating with them, both with my sound practice, but also working with all of their other modalities and teachers and bringing people into the space to be able to have conversations like these and just deepen my own, personal investment into well-being and creating community, which I think is where sound has led me. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Thank
Congratulations.
You. Can't wait to have you in there.
Yeah, I really, I see the space, I've seen it online and it looks amazing. I've really wanted to come and see the space. This is amazing.
You're invited anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. All right, guys. So George's gonna have to come back. Bring in your questions for the next one, because you can see we have to unpack every single book here that you brought. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
What I am really taking away from this conversation is that sound is just a tool. We need to come in open-minded and willing to do the work and just go through the journey. Nowadays, we're so eager to find the next masterclass that will give us the specific steps and tools and the solution to grow. Growth is such an individual journey that we cannot rush to get to the destination. We can use the tools available or look for them, but do the work individually that we need to get there. We invite you to do your research, and when you're ready to give yourself the gift of the sound meditation, maybe join George and I in a class. To learn more about Namaste City and this podcast, please visit namastecitylife.com and feel free to drop us a message by visiting the Contact Us page. You can follow Namaste City on Instagram or Facebook. And if you have not already done so, please go to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Thanks for listening to No More Distractions by Namaste City, hosted by me, Sonia. Today's episode guest was George MacPherson. You can connect with him through his Instagram page at @sound_of_the_times.